Okay, last week, as I mentioned, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention republished what it called a self-assessment tool that pushes teachers and administrators and school health staff to advocate for LGBT causes in the schools. In other words, instead of concerning itself with disease control and prevention, maybe even test scores, the schools are being encouraged by the CDC to indoctrinate children in their radical sexual ideology. Now, two questions. What does this have to do with learning? And what does it have to do with public health? Joining me now to discuss this is Meg Kilgannon, Senior Fellow for Education Studies at the Family Research Council and a former member of the Trump administration's Department of Education. Meg, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tony. It's great to see you.
Well, good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Okay. This is yet more from the Biden administration, the CDC, with a conglomerate of outside groups, including the Southern Poverty Law Center and all of these who advocate leftist radical ideas, are now under the umbrella of the CDC in trying to force this agenda. Of course, it's voluntary, but force this agenda on schools. Tell us about it.
Well, the amazing thing that relates to your previous guest, actually, Tony, is that this was published in October of 2020. And the fact that that happened in the middle of a pandemic, when we were waiting for Operation Warp Speed to help us get through that horrible time, right? They did have time at the CDC, because government is so huge and their money is so plentiful, to publish this document in October of 2020 while schools were still closed, to make sure that teachers were able to assess themselves. This is an assessment tool for teachers, for principals, for regular people, to figure out how inclusive they're being of the marginalized LGBT community. And so that was a priority even in October of 2020.
So there was, this is a self-assessment tool, and I'm reading from a printout from the website, and I quote, "School administrators are LGBT inclusive self-assessment tool can help you quickly gauge how inclusive you are at your school." And then, but it says here, see your score today and learn ways to increase inclusivity. Now, so you take this and you get a readout, and the readout is either you are
you
committed
get an A, a B, or a C, right?
Committed to change. A B is beginning to break through, and A is awesome ally. So my question, Meg, is this why we're failing in math and science scores? Is that we're focused as a government on pushing schools to assess their scores on how well they're doing in terms of LGBTQ propaganda?
I think that is a huge part of the problem. We've been focused for too long on fixing children instead of educating children. And children go to school wanting to learn. And it seems like education bureaucrats are at school wanting to change children. They're wanting to change families. They're wanting to indoctrinate people into a worldview that isn't the worldview that many students are walking in with.
Now, this is something that it's interesting. I think the timing of this came out during the holidays. It was a regurgitation of, as you said, something that was put out October 2020. But we have a new kind of a new breed of school board members now, with these conservatives have been parents who have been elected to school boards across the country. This is something they should be aware of and should be pushing back on.
I totally agree with that. I mean, some of the questions in this are really disturbing, Tony. One in particular that wanted the teacher to use neutral terms like partner instead of boyfriend or girlfriend to describe students' romantic relationships instead of making assumptions. Why is any teacher needing to assess the romantic relationship of a student? That's not a priority for students to have romantic relationships. The priority is for students to have relationships with knowledge and
Right.
to learn things that are important to become a productive citizen in a global economy. So it's strange to me that this assessment would encourage teachers to focus on this area of a student's life. It's disturbing.
Now,
the other questions that were involved here made one wonder if the parents' influence on children was a concern at all.
Yeah, it doesn't mention parents being informed of any of these decisions, whether or not a child use a pronoun that's inconsistent with their sex, their biological sex, or they want to change their name. Parents are not included here, at least not in the publication. Now, again, I want to say this is voluntary, but we know how those voluntary things work. I mean, could we ultimately see that a school's test results on whether or not they're inclusive to the LGBT community, could that not somehow surface elsewhere when it comes to grants going to a school?
Well, it could, and more likely this could be abused by a very ideological administrator who would assess a teacher poorly and adjust assignments given that teacher or that person in the school system, what kind of work they're allowed to do, the level of interaction that they have with students could be impacted based on their poor performance, quote unquote, on an assessment like this.
So
it is described as a self-assessment, right? But we all know that things can be abused in these situations.
So you're saying
and manipulated into something much more devious.
Those leftists who happen to be in to kind of dominate the public school system could use this to harass a teacher who does not want to play along with this whole thing when it comes to pronouns and everything else. They could use this as a tool from the federal government to put leverage on that teacher or that faculty member.
I can't hear you. My mic is out. I'm sorry. My earpiece is out.
So you can't hear me now? Maybe I can do sign language. My concern is that a lot of these things are voluntary.
No, it's totally
in their origins. Oh yeah, we're not going to we're just trying to help these things along. But as Meg pointed out, you will have these overly aggressive leftists in the process who will use this to harass teachers who don't want to play along. And so the CDC says that we have to do this. This is where we need the school board members to be aware of this, ask questions about it, and refuse to participate. If it is voluntary, why are we doing it? And I think that's the questions that school board members, a lot of this new wave of conservative school board members who were elected in this last election, should be asking these questions and should absolutely refuse to allow these to come into their school districts. It has nothing to do with public health, has nothing to do with education, should not be in our schools. All right, I think, Meg, do we have you back? Can you hear me?
Yes,
All right, good.
I can.
All right, so we got a couple minutes left. Let me ask you this question. Who are the actors in this? I made reference to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Who are all the leftist organizers that the CDC, by the way, says, now we don't embrace and endorse everything that's here. We're just promoting it, but we don't endorse it. Who are some of these organizations and what are they pushing?
It's quite a list, Tony. SPLC, GLAAD, GLSEN, the Human Rights Campaign, the National Association of School Nurses, Society for Adolescent Health. I mean, this is the part of the problem that has parents so frustrated with our educational system, and in some cases with our healthcare system, is that it is ideologically captured by groups that have a political agenda. They're advancing queer theory at the expense of students' health and at the expense of their education, to be sure. And this is simply not a sustainable situation, and it's why so many parents are going to school board meetings and complaining about the books that they find in the library, books that have been recommended by groups like the ones on this list that helped inform this CDC document. And until we have a system that respects the wishes of parents, respects the dignity of the human person, and values education, it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to see academic performance improve in the school system in the greatest nation on earth.
Meg, final question very quickly. How can school board members, parents, and others find out whether or not their schools are using these CDC guidelines?
You should check your school website to see if there's a link to this document. You could do a FOIA request to your school system asking if this document has been sent to the educators in your school system. And it's a great time for you to think about running for school board.
Yeah.
And you can go to frcaction.org/schools to find out more information about how to run for school board.
All right, Meg Kilgannon, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.